This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Tonight, for our 249th episode, we discuss The Breakfast Club from 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary this week. Written and directed by John Hughes, music by Keith Forsey. Starring Emilio Estevez as Andrew Clark, Paul Gleason as Richard Vernon, Anthony Michael Hall as Brian Johnson, John Capellos as Carl Reed, Judd Nelson as John Bender, Molly Ringwald as Claire Standish, and Ali Sheedy as Allison Reynolds. Background for the movie: The Breakfast Club was released on February 15th, 1985. On a $1 million budget, it grossed over $50 million at the worldwide box office for 1985, placing it 16th for that year. It was met with mostly positive critical reviews at the time for being a teen comedy not involving sex or violence. The song Don't You Forget About Me, performed by Scottish rock band Simple Minds, was released as a single on February 23rd, 1985, and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The Breakfast Club has since been called the quintessential 1980s film. In 2008, Empire magazine ranked it at number 369 on their 500 greatest movies of all time list. It later ranked at number 38 on their 2014 revisited list. Similarly, the New York Times placed the film on its best 1,000 movies ever made list, and Entertainment Weekly ranked the film number 1 on its list of the 50 best high school films ever. In 2016, The Breakfast Club was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. The Breakfast Club currently holds an 89% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 66 score on Metacritic, and a 3.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
I was trying to remember back if I saw this in the theater or if I didn't see it until after it came out on HBO. I honestly cannot remember, which is unusual for me. I think I saw it on HBO a couple of years after its release and did not have a strong opinion of it until later. I guess that's about the best I can do. I really don't remember the first time I saw it.
That's not all that surprising. For you being a unapologetic John Hughes hater, let's say, and for me being a 1980s movie downer, let's say this will be an interesting episode. We were supposed to balance each other out with our guest for the evening, who unfortunately could not be with us, but I really don't remember seeing this for the first time. It didn't leave a huge lasting impression on me. It wasn't like a wow moment. It was, oh, okay, I guess this is decent. I see why people like it. It's very reminiscent of the 80s. I get a lot of where the references come from. The attire or the costuming is obviously very significant, but there wasn't anything that told me this was one of the greatest movies ever made, which I think certain people who lived through the 80s, this was their movie. And I'm not entirely sure why.
I don't either. And quite frankly, I graduated high school in 1982, so I'm only 3 years removed from being in high school. And I never connected with this. In fact, in retrospect, when I saw the movie again, and as I started following John Hughes much more of his later works, I had criticisms of. 16 Candles is the one that really turned my stomach because of the sexism, the racism towards Asian Americans. And it just started me with a bad taste, not to mention then seeing or going to the theater and seeing She's Having a Baby, which was another John Hughes film with your mother. And I absolutely hated that film. And it just started giving me a sour opinion of John Hughes.
If I were to take a guess as to why this has become one of the relatable films that people have such nostalgia for, there were not a lot of movies that seemed to speak directly to young people. most of the films up to this point, whether you want to say it was American Graffiti or any of the other like teen comedies, were really made for people that were older who wanted a certain level of nostalgia about what it was to be younger. I mean, even American Graffiti that I mentioned a minute ago is told 10 years prior to when the movie actually comes out. So it's about people in their 30s thinking back to what it was like in the early 60s. This is one of the few times, and really up until the point where John Hughes kind of came around, that seemed to directly speak to young people in a language that was relatable and felt like what they were going through. And so for that, it was somewhat revolutionary. But in hindsight, it very much feels somewhat dumbed down for me. And I'll admit that had I watched this maybe while I was in high school as opposed to maybe like after college, which is when I think I first saw it, this might have hit me in a different way. If you're watching it during adolescence as opposed to in your mid-20s, I think it has a different resonance. But once you kind of grow out of some of that and you get out of the high school scene, or you just simply didn't like high school at all, I don't know if this movie hits you in the same way.
First of all, most of the movies that were teen movies were highly sexually charged, and it was kind of frattish. Animal House, Revenge of the Nerds,
Porky's.
And, it was more about the sex and sexual conquest, and they were extremely misogynistic in general. This one at least made an attempt to not be so sophomoric as far as, what it was trying to do. It put teens in a position where they're talking with some level of emotion and intelligence as opposed to anything that had been done before involving teenagers. The closest thing is at that time, the sassy teen in sitcoms was the closest you had to a teenager being treated with any level of respect. And so that's fair assessment as far as that goes. But I would say that if you had, for example, canned spaghetti, and you grew up with canned spaghetti, and that's the only thing you had, the first time somebody made you real spaghetti, you thought this was the greatest thing ever. And then ultimately, when you went to a real restaurant with real Italian cooking and you had spaghetti, you realized how the canned spaghetti was horrible and the stuff that you had been eating was passable but not great. One of the problems I have with this film is specifically how neat and tidy each of the groups are. I thought it was asinine to believe that it was that clear cut into each of those sections, that there was no overlap. And even if there was, I thought it was extremely implausible that in one day these groups would break down and be able to communicate and interconnect. I just didn't see it. And in fact,
not even in like one day, 7 hours.
Yeah. How this all came together and how the ending was and how they all kind of opened up and started this relationship and this inner communication, and they had this great understanding of themselves and of each other. I thought it was very implausible and unrealistic.
No, I think the most realistic part of the movie is the discussion of what everything will be like Monday morning.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. I was not an athlete, but I was friends with people who were athletes, and I was in the class, with the more, the more gifted. Not that I'm saying to blow my own horn or anything, but
I would say involved, not gifted. There are people that were probably gifted that were not involved in the extracurriculars. In the way I experienced high school, there were really two groups of people, those involved in extracurriculars and those that weren't.
Now, I had a much bigger class, and so it was much different because we had certain kids that took the higher level classes, and we all hung around together.
I guess I understand.
And so, and then I was involved in tons of extracurricular theater and Model UN and the school newspaper and all this stuff. So I had a wide range. In fact, I've made a comment that I went through my yearbook. There were 463 of us who graduated in my class, and I knew approximately 420 of them. I was going between groups. And so maybe that's part of the reason why is that, I had people that I considered friends that were probably in each of those 5 kids' stereotypes. And I didn't see the need for, and didn't understand exactly the caste system that was established by the movie.
So, what is the movie about?
That teens struggle to have understanding, meaning, and trying to figure out what their life is or is not going to be. And they're all ultimately have the same misgivings, fears, inadequacy, fear of inadequacies, and self-doubt. It's just they have different facades and how they present it.
I had identity as fluid. I think the biggest thing, although you kind of alluded to it there, that they all experience many in the same way, the same challenges, the same fears, the same problems, that realistically, nobody fits into any one box. And to try and pigeonhole anyone into one thing because they're associated with it, whether that be part of their personality or the activity they're involved in, would be to minimize who they are as a human being. And I think if you were to do the modern reversion of this movie, first off, I probably wouldn't have it in high school because I think it's hard enough going through high school, and this is probably why cliques exist, to know who you are as a person, to be able to see beyond the kind of clique nature of the way we place ourselves or how we sort and organize ourselves. We organize ourselves by some really lowest common denominator stuff. But by the time you get into college, a lot of that stuff starts to fade away. And so I think it would be much more realistic if you had a forced togetherness, like on a group project type of thing, where you placed a whole bunch of people together that had no business otherwise being together, except they're in like some entry-level class and are forced to work on a group project, something to that effect, and they realize that they're not so different. I mean, to a degree, the film is ahead of its time in that way. And I also don't think it would be nearly as homogenous, even though this is the Chicago suburbs of the 80s, and it was likely to have been a very white high school. You're likely to get a lot more DEI in a modern version of The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
So if John Hughes specifically was catering to young people in a way that nobody had to this point, are we still really making movies that are directly for teens or even content that's directly for them? A lot of them have flocked to TikTok or YouTube, and I don't see that the content, even the movies we often are discussing on this show, really appeal toward where young people are at these days.
Well, I disagree that this movie was made for teens. I think this movie was made for either people just out of adolescence to look back on where things were and to be reflective of what high school was, and for adults to have an appreciation of what took place in high school or have some understanding of where things developed from high school. I don't think these characters relate directly with high school students. I know that it didn't relate with me, and I was only a few years older, but maybe I'm just different in that regard. But
you were always too serious.
I know. I know. I'll always remember one of my classmates met your mother when we were first married and couldn't believe that somebody actually would marry me because I was so serious about everything, which ironically is that I've always had a good sense of humor and make jokes, but I guess I did take myself rather seriously at the time and still do.
You probably would have had to be on the career trajectory that you ended up on.
Well, I wanted to rule the world before I was 40, but
didn't exactly work out that way.
No, it didn't, but shoot for the stars, you still get close enough.
So, do you want to dig a little further into the background of the movie? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
Yes. 5 high school students from different cliques: Brainy Brian, Rebellious John, Popular Claire, athletic Andrew, and outcast Allison are forced to spend Saturday in detention together. Initially clashing due to their differences, they gradually open up, revealing their personal struggles and realizing they have more in common than they thought. Through laughter, tension, and heartfelt confessions, they form an unlikely bond that challenges the stereotypes that define them. By the end of the day, they leave detention changed, uncertain if their newfound understanding will survive Monday morning, but forever marked by their shared experience.
Thank you. Did you know? The scene in which all characters sit in a circle on the floor in the library and tell stories about why they were in detention was not scripted. Writer and director John Hughes told them all to ad-lib. Did you know? Judd Nelson stayed in character off camera, even bullying Molly Ringwald. John Hughes nearly fired him over this, but Paul Gleason defended Nelson, saying that he was a good actor and he was just trying to get into character. Did you know? Bender's flinch when Vernon fakes a punch was genuine. Judd Nelson really thought Paul Gleason was going to hit him. Did you know? It was originally suggested that there would be several sequels to this movie occurring every 10 years in which the Breakfast Club would get back together. This did not come to pass due to the volatile relationship between John Hughes and Judd Nelson. Hughes stated that he would never work with Nelson again. Also, it was unclear whether or not Hughes still held ill will against his oft-cast starlet, Molly Ringwald. They had a falling out in the late 80s after Ringwald decided to move on from the teen film genre to pursue more adult roles, thus severing her relationship with Hughes. Did you know? John Cusack auditioned several times for John Bender, even traveling between Chicago and Los Angeles before being cast. However, John Hughes went in a different direction and dropped Cusack in favor of Judd Nelson, which was heavily influenced by the casting director. Did you know? Judd Nelson went undercover at a local high school outside Chicago near where the film was shooting and convinced the teenagers that he was a legitimate student. After buying beer for them with his fake ID, he was really 24 at the time, Nelson told them to drop him off at the hotel where the actors were staying. Years later, reflecting on his antics, Nelson said, "They would ask me why I was staying there, and I told them my dad was in jail. I'm staying at the Westin O'Hare while my dad's incarcerated." And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back.
Hey, movie lovers, this is Kyle, host and producer of the Movie Wars podcast. We're not just a movie review podcast. There's plenty of those. On Movie Wars, a panel of stand-up comedians blends humor with deep film analysis using their unique war card system to grade movies across key categories. Each episode delivers thoughtful insights and spirited debate, offering a fresh comedic take on film analysis. New episodes drop every Thursday on all podcasting platforms and YouTube. Deeply researched, gut-wrenchingly funny, you'll love Movie Wars.
Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 250th episode, we discuss another of the best films ever made, and one of the most culturally influential films of the last 35 years, Schindler's List from 1993, directed by the great Steven Spielberg, written by Steve Zalian, music by G-Mote Hall of Famer John Williams, starring Liam Neeson, Ben Kingsley, and Ray Fiennes. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Dad, we left off at Best Performance. Who do you have down?
I have Judd Nelson.
As do I.
Yeah, I thought his performance was by far the most refined and the most intricate. He had broad range of emotion. He was believable. He could easily convey his pain with a devil-may-care attitude and a cockiness at the same time.
Yeah, it was definitely a layered performance in a way that I didn't really feel most of the other characters either were written well enough for that to come out or were just simply not great actors. Like, the way Estevez plays Andrew feels kind of 2D-ish. And
yeah,
for some people, 2D Mighty Ducks would be more their speed. But, or D2, I guess it's D2,
yeah.
Mighty Ducks. Anyway, I digress. But I thought that for the way that he kind of makes the script go farther, like, obviously he's the one with the meatiest part. If you just take it based on what is written, he's got the most lines. He's the most rebellious. He's going to be the most almost charismatic just by sheer presence. But with another actor, I don't know if you get quite this level of performance where it feels like he's the true standout of the movie. To me, this is less a John Hughes film than it is a Judd Nelson starring vehicle. I think by far he's the breakout performance of this entire movie.
Yeah, I actually his career really never took off very much.
No, this is by far his high watermark.
Yeah, and I never really understood because I thought he was by far the best actor in the film. So I don't know if it was personal struggles. I know that like Ali Sheedy had a lot of problems with drugs and rehab and such. I don't know if he did or didn't. You know, that sometimes causes a black mark on a career and kind of lends a trajectory that's less than it could have been.
I think for the most part, he got a reputation after this movie, whether either earned or by way of John Hughes, as being very difficult to work with. And thus, he kind of got a little blackballed.
Yeah, maybe. But if that's the worst that could happen is, you know, that he was difficult to work on, there have been a lot of actors who have went on to have very successful careers, which were much more difficult than Judd Nelson by these reports were to work with.
Fair enough, but for him being the potential breakout of this movie for what went on to be a much more lauded film, and then not to have anything really come of it after the fact, I don't know. It doesn't seem like something's adding up.
Yeah.
So then who was your best secondary?
Paul Gleason. He's the guy that's the dick that you love to hate. Everything Paul Gleason was in, he either was a jerk, an asshole, or an absolute prick.
Aren't those all the same thing?
There's nuances, but he always played kind of a heavy type. Even though he was like that, there's something that was likable about him at times. But
okay,
that's who I had because I just liked his performance. I thought he really nailed it as far as being the vice principal and kind of the dick.
If you go to high school, most times, unless you're in like one of those really small schools where you kind of like the administration, but nobody really likes the principal or the vice principal because they're the authoritarians. They've got to make sure that everybody's up to dress code and, you know, they're kind of dictatorial, that sort of thing. And he straddles this line between being kind of egomaniac and a disciplinarian that you would get out of most like principles of that nature. He does a very good job of being representative and being an easy foil, because realistically there are two antagonists in this movie. There's him and there's the parameters of detention, and then there's all the pre-made prejudice kind of keeping them adrift of each other, and they to an extent overcome both of those by the end of the movie.
Who was your secondary?
I had Hughes, just simply from a writing and directorial standpoint. Somebody kind of pointed this out in one of their reviews, and I can't remember where I saw it, that this is almost like a stage play. It's a very confined space. They're all, for the most part, save for one sequence, stuck within the library. They're in very enclosed or encapsulated captive areas, and it has very few characters. So for me, I always gravitate towards movies that are a lot like theater because of my theater background. And as such, this kind of reads like a play. It's a lot of line delivery. It's a lot of people just in a room kind of talking to each other. There isn't a lot of great action, but it's about the most teen-centric theater production that you could probably get. I just like the way that the film is structured, scripted. I feel that there is a lot of heart to the line deliveries that are there.
And where you got that from was the New Yorker piece that Molly Ringwald wrote in 2018.
Most charismatic for you.
I had Molly Ringwald. At the time, I had a crush on Ali Sheedy. But in retrospect now, I think Molly Ringwald had a much more charismatic aura about her. I just thought her presence in the film was much more, I don't know how to put it, sparkling, I guess. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Or not. I don't know.
I have the song that is so closely tied with this film, Don't You
Okay.
Forget About Me. I've often selected songs as the most charismatic, but this song is truly an earworm.
Yeah.
I think I've been whistling it all week.
Yeah, okay.
Best scene, I have 5 nominees here. Don't Mess with the Bull, you'll get the horns. Then I have No Dad, What About You? I have Returning from Bender's Locker, kind of the comedic, farcical scene that's probably the most action or physical heavy of the entire film. Then I have Monday Morning, which we kind of referenced a little bit before. And then finally, the goodbyes, the ending to the film. Did you have any others that you wanted to nominate?
No.
So out of these, what is the best scene?
I have No Dad. What about you?
Yeah, I've always had some struggles with trying to figure out the pacing of that because there's no real spacing between his line deliveries. Like I could have, if you were doing it in a theater, there'd be a little bit more spacing where I could tell which character was which that he's imitating. You kind of get the gist of it, but it's something that to me should be much more effective, and it just doesn't quite hit me as hard.
To be perfectly honest, listening to that scene, I started thinking of my own father and how in high school he was kind of a hood. Yeah, he was a troublemaker, kind of the bad boy, the relationship and the situation with his own father and such. So I just kind of started thinking of him in that situation and him opening up about his life at home or lack of life at home. Maybe that's why it connected with me more.
I had Monday Morning because I think, as we mentioned before, I think it's the most self-reflective of any moment in the entire movie. It's the only thing that to me raises it from possibly a B to something beyond that, because it's taking the criticisms of the movie, where your criticism specifically to open up this conversation is that it's not realistic for kids to break down the barriers of cliques within 7 hours on a random Saturday forced together. And it takes it that degree further that says, okay, well, of course these wouldn't break down, because then what happens the next day that they're in school together? And so by addressing that in this particular manner, having that forethought to put that conversation in here and live in that space, I think was an absolute stroke of genius as far as the writing.
I mean, I lived through it because, when you're doing certain things, certain activities, you would cross over into various groups, and you'd be friendly with somebody because you were at the cast party or you did something nice. And then Monday morning would come around and things would be different. They would be back into your normal cast. So I can understand and I could relate to that. It just didn't click with me as much because, I don't know, I guess I have a hard time believing 16, 17 years olds are that self-reflective.
36, 37-year-olds are not that self-reflective.
Yeah, I know.
But that's why you have to subject yourself. You turn yourself over to the reality of the movie.
The reality of the movie.
Yes.
Okay. A movie is reality. All right. Got it.
The movie creates its own reality. You've never heard this before?
Okay.
No wonder you don't like sci-fi.
Yes.
Anyway, favorite scene.
No Dad, What About You is my favorite scene for the same reasons I indicated why it was the best scene. It just connected with me this time around.
For me, it's the return from Bender's Locker, just because of how comedic it is and kind of the energy that it brings to it. It breaks up kind of what would otherwise be a dull area in the movie. It's kind of like the bridge in a musical song that you got to kind of break up the flow a little bit to get people hooked back in to where it's at. If you just simply had these kids at all times in the library talking to each other, I don't think the movie's successful. So you do have to get them on the move a little bit. It was a good use of direction to be able to break that up just occasionally and then go into these, in some ways, kind of like a Stooges physical comedy section of the movie where they're running into the vice principal and are trying not to get caught.
It was almost a French farce. Going in one door, somebody else comes out a different door, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Because they run around and all of a sudden he'd be coming at a different place and they'd be taking off. And yeah.
As far as most indelible, I have the ending and the song and Bender's fist being raised in the air. It's one of the first things I think about when thinking about this movie.
Exactly.
It's the iconic moment.
Yeah.
All right, that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, did you know all of our newest episodes are also now in video format? That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. And that's not all. We're also on the cusp of a few different live streams coming up in the near future. First, our annual Oscars preview will be live streamed on our YouTube channel the week before the Oscars, and then we will have a live post-Oscars review the night after the awards with a whole bunch of your favorite guests dropping by to share their thoughts on what happened. We've also got a James Bond rankings live stream series planned and much, much more. If you want to check that all out, just head to youtube.com/@GMOTPodcast and find us there. And if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Bruce French, 79, American actor. Passions, The Riches, and Fletch. Tony Roberts, 85, American actor. Annie Hall, Played Against Sam, and Serpico.
And so we recognize these here for their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Let's go to Best Funniest Lines. Andrew Clark. We're all pretty bizarre. Some of us are just better at hiding it, that's all.
John Bender. Does Barry Manilow know that you raided his wardrobe?
Closing narration. Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong, but we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us as you want to see us, in the simplest terms, in the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain, and an athlete, and a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club.
Andrew Clark. Why do you have to insult everybody? John Bender. I'm being honest, asshole. I would expect you to know the difference.
Andrew Clark. What do you need a fake ID for? Brian Johnson. So I can vote?
That was the most audible laugh I had in the movie.
Apparently that was an ad lib by Anthony Michael.
Yeah, okay. I'd be that nerd. Yeah, I wanted to vote. Andrew Clark, speak for yourself. John Bender, do you think I'd speak for you? I don't even know your language.
I'll take the hard one out here, but John Bender. Stupid, worthless, no good, goddamn, freeloading son of a bitch. Retarded, big mouth, know-it-all, asshole, jerk. You forgot ugly, lazy, and disrespectful. Shut up, bitch! Go fix me a turkey pot pie. No, Dad, what about you? Fuck you. No, Dad, what about you? Fuck you. Dad, what about you? Fuck you.
I found that most of the lines were more dialogue than quips, so I'm out.
Okay. I got two more, but they're pretty short. Andrew Clark. I taped Larry Lester's buns together.
Yeah.
And then finally, Andrew Clark. My God, are we going to be like our parents?
Well,
I am. Although, to be fair, I've also been told that I am the worst combination of both of my grandfathers.
I've said that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So, kudos.
Yeah. Oh, well. Anyway.
At least you didn't tell me I was your report card.
That is true. When your mother said that about you guys, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And she goes, well, my dad told me that. And I'm like, no wonder you've got problems. I mean, my God, putting that on a kid that they're not only supposed to be themselves and do the best they can, that you have to reflect on your parents.
No. Let's take that further. That my parents' own value in themselves is based on my performance.
Yeah.
Talk about ego.
Wow.
Or lack thereof, I suppose.
I know. I the minute I heard that, I was like, what? Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the Stanley rubric and grade this thing out. Legacy is up first. It is a measure of the legacy of the film roughly 5 years after it came out, so roughly 1990 to today. So that would mean it is basically the legacy as long as I've been alive of this film. We split this category between the legacy between the industry and the audience at large, 5 points and 5 points for a total of 10. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first. I'm going to give it for the industry a 5. It is revered. John Hughes is loved. He did more work in a span of, 10 years that's been impactful than any director or writer I can think of in that short time frame. I didn't even realize he retired or stopped doing film work in 94 because he had so much over such a short period of time. And it's so highly regarded and so highly revered. And it just seems to get more revered as time goes by. So industry is a 5. And the public, what was it? 80% of our staff knew the movie?
It's at least 80%, if not like 90% knew of the movie. Probably 70% had seen it.
Yeah. And I would guess that 60 to 70% of the general public, if you played the song, they would know that it's from The Breakfast Club.
Americans, yes. And probably certain sections of Europeans. I would agree.
So I'm at a 10 for legacy.
Oof.
It's gotten stronger as time's gone by.
So first off, while I, for the most part, agree with you at the universality of the audience score on this one, there is in no way that I could put this at a 5 for the industry. As much as John Hughes has name recognition within the industry, and a lot of people that are currently big names within the industry grew up on a lot of his films and have tried to copy a lot of his films, I would say namely like Judd Apatow and Seth Rogen, and some of that whole lineage of comedy comes almost very reminiscently from John Hughes films, or you could see the lineage from those films. But even though there's stuff that's self-referential, there's stuff that has circled back around, I just don't see that like people are making movies in this vein still. This is pre-existing a lot of like YA novels, and now we basically just dumb down what YA means to, we're going to make franchise films. So the Marvel films will be for young people, and Twilight will be for young people, and Harry Potter will be for young people. And no, we're not making stuff that's actually for them, speaking to them, save for apparently Euphoria. But outside of that, I just don't think that the respect from the industry is still there in the way that John Hughes really wanted to speak to a specific generation at the time. And so by that standpoint, and judging it against some of the other things that we've held as a 5 for the industry, this had no great significance within any award circuits. It's on a few lists after the fact, but it's not like it's not making any sight and sound list anytime soon. Okay. This is one of those that's lived much more among popular culture than it has in the industry. So I have that at 3.5. I'll grant you the 5 and come up from where I originally was on a 4.5. So I'll go an 8.5.
I think you've convinced me, and I will go down for the industry to a 4.
Okay, so you're at a 9 then?
Yeah.
All right, so that's an 8.75 between us then. All right, then let's move to impact and significance. Similar to the last category, this is a measure of the impact and significance, except within the first 5 years, as opposed to after the first 5 years, of the film, both between the audience and the industry. And we divide this again, 5 and 5 points between those two groups for a total of 10. I guess since you went first on the last one, I will go first here. I don't think this was a significant movie in the time that it was made. I think it had some resonance, but it made its bones being on cable after the fact, and being in rentals after the fact, and being a nostalgia movie after the fact. Personally, I think Hughes made it bigger with Ferris Bueller than he ever did The Breakfast Club. And while The Breakfast Club is more closely related to John Hughes than Ferris Bueller, partially because I think Ferris Bueller kind of takes on a life of its own with its rather iconic characters. No awards attention at the time, finished 16th at the box office in its initial run, which isn't bad, but it's not like one of the great films at the time. It was good, but it wasn't great. And I don't think people were going as Judd Nelson for Halloween the next year necessarily, in the way that they were dressing up as Ghostbusters or Marty McFly or other movies that were just more significant in that moment.
Yeah.
So among things that were really 80s, I think this over time has built up more steam than it did in the moment that it was actually released. I could be very wrong. I didn't live through the 80s. I am a 90s kid, but I have a 2 for the industry and I have a 3.5 for the audience for a 5.5.
I have a 3 for the industry and I have a 2.5 for the public. So I'm at a 5.5. For the industry, I think it did impact and make it easy for John Hughes to continue to produce, direct, and write films. And he had that great run. If this does not hit its mark, that run of films probably does not get the latitude that it did. He may not have been able to do all of them. So I'm giving it, for the industry, a little higher points for that. It didn't resonate. Like I said, I didn't run out to see it. I went out and saw Back to the Future. I saw, a lot of times I went, it wasn't like I wasn't going to the movies. It was the one thing I tended to do back in my college days when I could, was get to the movie theater because it was an outlet, getting off campus, doing some stuff, meeting up with friends, a lot of time old friends, and doing stuff. But I didn't go and see this, I don't think, in the theaters. I don't remember it. So I don't think it really resonated with the public, having lived through that period of time.
Well, either way, it's a very easy math, 5.5 average between the two of us. Let's go to novelty here. This is a measure of the originality of the idea or of really anything about the movie, and then the movie's execution overall on that originality. We split the category 5 and 5 for a total of 10 points. I'll take the lead on this one. I think this is a fairly original movie. The fact that we've discussed it on multiple different occasions, that this is really before the time of YA movies, TV, before a lot of literature for young adults. There was not a lot of material that was made specifically for people of this demographic up till this point, or at least until John Hughes really started making his movies. And I think that this broke through eventually because it spoke to a group of people that didn't feel like there was anything for them specifically. Now, that being said, I have some criticisms that I do think that a couple of the characters are pretty thinly written. And while I do appreciate what Judd Nelson is doing in the role and Paul Gleason, it feels like there's some really two-dimensional acting by a few of the people that are in this movie. Anthony Michael Hall comes to mind. Ali Sheedy is not really given a whole lot to do in this movie. She kind of creates a character without having too many lines, but for being the biggest star, the top name on the marquee, Emilio Estevez is kind of forgettable in this role for me.
Yes.
So I had that at a 3.5. I have an 8.
I give it a 4 for originality because it was a fresh look at something, and it was a more intellectual look at high school and of teens. And it was not Porky's, and it was not Revenge of the Nerds. It took a significant shift. But the execution I had problems with. I thought the fact that, all of a sudden they all come to this moment of enlightenment. They can so easily relate to each other in the span of 7 hours.
Again, you have to surrender yourself a bit to the movie reality.
I know, but even the fact that they're able to isolate and have all these conversations and the principal doesn't check in on them and figure out that this is all going on.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to let that criticism really get in the way. You are a huge fan of old sitcoms like MASH and Cheers and Andy Griffith and Green Acres, where every frickin' conflict was resolved within 20 minutes, let alone 7 hours.
Okay, but
if you want to invent shit to try and get around why you do or do not like a movie, at least come with better things than that.
Except this is supposed to be a reflection on reality, and sitcoms were never supposed to be reality.
This is a teen dramedy.
Okay.
But
it's supposed to be based upon some level of reality. It's supposed to be more true than untrue.
Okay, so The Breakfast Club is a little bit more realistic to life than Mr. Ed.
True, yes.
Okay, fine.
So I went with 4 for originality and 3.5 for execution because, and again, you pointed out, some of these characters are rather superficial and the acting was not the greatest performances. I understand they're teens and a lot of these kids were kids, 17, 18 years of age, playing high schoolers, but there wasn't a lot of effort or a lot of drawing out of great acting chops at times. So I'm at a 7.5.
So that's a 7.75 average between the two of us. Let's move to Classicness. I'll admit this is one of the hardest Classicness scores that I've really thought about in quite some time because it's not just the reflection of what this movie is, but maybe on John Hughes films in general. And there's some stuff in here that is fairly common to a lot of 80s films, that's fairly common to a lot of John Hughes films, that in time we have said is probably ill classic, that we would probably normally reduce certain points on. That being said, maybe we need a new barometer of what is or is not ill classic. I know that we've gotten a lot of criticism, and frankly, I don't care about most of the stupid trolls on TikTok or YouTube that have been messaging us, and they're just idiots. But I'm wondering if maybe there should be a maliciousness intent that gives an extra qualifier. So maybe this is like a one in law school and one who's been an attorney for 30 years, where there's a differentiation between that where it's intentional and that where it's negligence. In here, I don't think they're intentionally malicious, but I think that in hindsight, they're clearly negligent in some of the content that's included in here, such as the sexual assault.
I think that is malicious. The fact is that they had to have that scene in there showing her panties, and they couldn't have Molly Ringwald be there, so they had to have an adult body double do it. And they still put the scene in there. You could have alluded to it. You didn't have to show it.
But that was commonplace for the 80s where, and even to a degree the 70s, where you needed to have a little bit of titillation in your teen movies to get them to sell.
Wow, I understand the titillation aspect of it, but boy, that one really bothers me. It was so unnecessary.
Okay,
and they knew it was wrong because it was illegal. They couldn't use Molly Ringwald for it. They had to put in a body double who was an adult to do the shot.
So let's assume that that's actually intentionally malicious by a legal definition, let's say. Where else in the film are we really truly picking up on this? I mean, the inclusion of popular terms of the time, such as a particular homophobic slur.
Yes.
I would deem that to be negligent as opposed to, or maybe even reckless, as opposed to intentionally malicious. Yes, it was intentionally malicious at the time in its usage, but it was so commonplace that its usage didn't offend people the way that they would have thought now.
Yeah. And there are a lot of slang terms, homophobic slang terms, that have been utilized. I mean, it's in Carlin's 7 words you can't say on television is one of them. That was a funny bit when it came out. You could not use that term necessarily now for obvious reasons. And having lived through that time frame, I'll tell you that was not uncommon. That was a general conversation. That was something that went on a lot, especially among guys.
To criticize things as being gay or to use certain slang derogatory terms was stuff I was using in high school.
Yeah.
And that's 15 years ago.
So it's changed rapidly in a short order. So I'm not holding it out for that necessarily as much. Maybe I'm being a little overly sensitive, but the idea that all of a sudden Ali Sheedy's character is much more acceptable that she puts on makeup.
That's kind of a Pygmalion thing, though. I think that might be a touch oversensitive.
All right, fine. So I'm being a little oversensitive. I didn't give it any points down necessarily for it, but I couldn't keep it up. And in my opinion, the sexual assault, the fact that we had at least 2 female characters that were probably more interesting than two of the 3 male characters gave it some points up. But the sexual assault shot in and of itself, to me, kind of detracted enough from it. So if you want, I'll give you my score. I'm at a 5.5.
Okay. The one thing you didn't really mention that I'd like to briefly touch on here is the false imprisonment.
Yeah, okay.
From an administrator, that is egregious.
Yeah.
If the parents cared at all and knew what was going on, that guy would be fired so fast. And they'd be settling. That would never go to trial. So I was willing to even reduce it a little bit further on that. The one place that I would give this a little bit of points is again, it's ahead of its time by catering to a group of people that, to this point, had not really been spoken to before in popular language or culture and had been kind of talked down to. And in a way, the way this movie is structured to break down barriers and be more inclusive and identity fluid, I think are themes that are ahead of their time and part of the reason why this movie has resonated and lasted with people. So I was willing to settle at a 6. If we call the malicious intent of the assault there, I think that's probably egregious enough to go down to a 5.
Are we trying to reach accommodation or are we going to average yet? All right. I like my 5.5.
I think I'll go with a 5. I will accept the nature based on the description that they knew it was wrong and they did it anyway. So that puts it at a 5.25 average between the two of us. Now, rewatchability. This one's going to be a little different between the two of us. If I were to do the objective ranking, as I've been trying to do a little bit more, this is 95 minutes. It does have a few spots that drag for me, especially around the parts where they have to break it up by going to the locker and doing some other stuff, because it does just become people in a room talking. And if you're not interested in the conversation or you relate to it, it has an ability to kind of wear on you. I think the concept, if it were any longer of a movie, this wouldn't be almost unwatchable as a rewatchable, because the concept kind of wears thin. You have enough there for maybe a good 75 minutes, but you're stretching it out in order to get it to a 95-minute film. But all in all, I mean, this has been a cable staple for a reason. And so I went with a 7.5.
This is a film that if it's on or somebody really wants to watch it, I'll watch it again. But if I never see it again in my life, I'm fine. So I'll go with a 4.
So this is a back-to-back rewatch with shampoo on your 96th birthday?
Sure.
Great double feature.
You'll have to wake me up when it's over.
So that's a 5.75 average between the two of us. So let's move to audience score on this one. We had a 90% for Google users and a 92% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us a 9.1. So to repeat the categories, we had an 8.75 for legacy, a 5.5 for impact and significance, a 7.75 for novelty, a 5.25 for classicness, a 5.75 for rewatchability, and a 9.1 for audience score, giving us a final total of 42.1, and currently placing it on our list at number 177, just behind Midnight Cowboy and ahead of The Notebook.
Okay.
If you have any disagreements with our scoring, and I do think that this will create a little bit of controversy, but you can certainly write us at Gmote Podcast on any of our socials. Write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com or find us on the website ronnieduncanstudios.com/Gmote Podcast. All right, let's move to remaining questions on this one. What does happen Monday morning?
They go back to where they were.
Yeah.
Now, a reunion 5, 10, 15 years later, this may have had some impact.
I have a feeling that the only relationship that may last a little bit is going to be Andrew and Allison, possibly, because she's kind of in the background. And if she truly has done this kind of like physical transformation, she might be acceptable to dating him, that nobody would really notice. But otherwise, I can't see that the Claire character and the John character are gonna like last more than 5 seconds afterward. And
Yeah.
Brian's gonna go back to his nerdy clubs and whatever else, and I just don't think that they're gonna overlap all that much, especially if the high school is of any size. It's not like it's the high school I went to where my graduating class was 53 and we were one of the largest in like 5 years.
Yeah.
Then we've kind of already generally discussed this question, but wouldn't Bender be able to sue the school for false imprisonment? Yes.
Yes. Biggest problem is going to be proof.
Well, you might have some corroborating witnesses with the janitor.
That's true.
And the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, what is the legacy of John Hughes?
John Hughes is someone that's popular within pop culture and general society, but will never be held in high regard critically for his films.
I think his films are fun and entertaining and for the most part rewatchable, particularly like Ferris Bueller and certain other 80s comedies. Obviously Home Alone that we've discussed on the show at one point. That's like a staple for some people around Christmas. Those are all rewatchable films, but I would say they're more reminiscent of pop art as opposed to anything that's like high art.
Norman Rockwell.
Andy Warhol.
Warhol was considered a little bit better than that, but not much.
Okay. But Warhol is not being compared to like Dali.
Well, yeah. Even Dali was not considered as great of an artist as Picasso or some of the others, but still, I understand.
So, any remaining questions for you?
No, not really.
Okay, let's move to remaining thoughts for the week. I will just say, as kind of a record keeping, in case you missed it on last week's episode, we do have official dates for the 2 Oscars live shows that we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing the first one on Sunday, February 23rd at 6 p.m. That will be our Oscars preview for the year. And then we'll be doing our live reaction show on the 3rd of March at 7 p.m. That's Central Time. So in case you're in a different time zone, you'll have to do your own calculations. I suppose I'll provide Eastern Time. I think that would be 8 p.m. and Mountain Time, 5 p.m. Or not Mountain, Pacific Time, that'd be 5 p.m. So you can do your own calculations based off of that. But as far as the reaction show, we do have a few of your favorite guests already lined up for the show. Adam Freed will be with us. I believe Sarah Shea will also be back with us. Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac will be back with us. And I think we might even get Kieran B. from BPC to join us for that evening as well. We've got a couple of others that we're still looking at as potential people for that reaction show, but we'll have a lot of fun. So please join us for that. Otherwise, the audio version of that should be lined up the day after. So that will go out to all the Spotify and other places that you normally get your podcasts if you're not going to watch the YouTube show. But again, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/@GMotePodcast. I will also say that we just had our live stream this last Saturday with Andrew Buss, the author of the great book Superbad, I Am McLovin. And that was a great time that we had for that. So you can catch the audio version of that. That was a live stream, but you can also catch the non-live live stream version of that on the YouTube channel as well. We did a special edition kind of show for that to promote his new book that, Dad, you said that you really enjoyed reading. So I would be on the lookout for that as well.
Yes.
And we do have some other live stream series coming up, probably over the summer would be my guess, when we're going to get to this James Bond rankings series that we're going to do. But we have not yet had the opportunity, partially due to commitments for Oscar season, as well as my schedule with law school, to be able to finish all 25 Bond movies. I think we're at like 12 right now. So we have a lot of stuff coming up. But as far as housekeeping, that takes care of it for right now. So actual final thoughts for the week.
You and I went and saw I'm Still Here over the weekend.
I'm going to save most of my reactions for Oscar movies until the preview.
Okay, that's fine. I just am commenting. I'm going to have some difficulty getting to The Brutalist because it's just not anywhere close to me that I can get to. But I should have every other Oscar film watched. It's either Best Picture or the actors have been in the top tier of the categories here, done by the end of the week. So then I can start watching the other stuff.
Yeah, I think we're planning to watch most of the shorts next week.
Correct.
So we enjoyed that last year. I think we can probably pound out most of those. I'll just say that I don't know how the fuck I got to 53 films last year. There's just no possible way to do it this year. And I don't even think there are 53 films nominated this year.
Oh, okay.
I want to say it's like 48 or 49. So, but even so, I know that we always have a good time with that. Do you have your in memoriam tiebreaker thought of already?
Not yet. I will.
Okay. By the way, with
yes, I know.
You only have like 2 weeks to go there, bud.
I'm aware. I have half the film watched.
Otherwise, you got to do 2, and I get to select another film for you.
I know. I have to finish the film.
And you have to record and release an episode.
I'm aware. I know.
Okay. Because you still haven't paid up on the bowl bet from over a year ago at this point.
Yeah, I know. All right.
But anyway, that looks like a good spot for this week. Thank you for listening. I could have got more out. Next week for our 250th episode, we discuss another of the best films ever made, and one of the most culturally influential films of the last 35 years, Schindler's List from 1993, directed by the great Steven Spielberg, written by Steve Zalier, music by G-Mote Hall of Famer John Williams, starring Liam Neeson, Ben Kingsley, and Ray Fiennes. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestOldTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Brian Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.